Just give me one moment.
Vijay, namaste. Jai Bhim. I never know what really to say because there's so many communities in the world. I once met followers of Vinaba Bhave and they said to me, we should all say Jai Jagat, victory to the world, and get over our localized feelings. So sometimes I agree. Jai Jagat.
So page. So welcome to all of you for this fourth session in the series of six sessions or lectures led by Professor Peter Friedlander. And today we will be going deeper into the discussion that Peter sir has initiated from last three of his lectures. And today we will be looking at a very interesting part of the practice that is popular not only in India but throughout the world, which is known as meditation using the breath. Anapanasati is a very traditional standard practice across all the Buddhist texts throughout the world. And amazingly, this presentation is about the mindfulness of ashwas and prashwas in the body, and in the tradition of Kabir. Peter sir could fathom a lot of information, a lot of teachings of Sadhguru Kabir, which blends with the Buddhist sort of teachings on how one can find one's nirvana in the practice of mindfulness of breathing. So, without taking much time, I request Peter sir to please begin his talk and presentation.
Thank you so much, Mangesh. I'm very pleased that we have this opportunity to share on this topic today. कभी-कभी हम ऐसे करते हैं कि हम साधारण हिंदू विचारों से शुरू करते हैं, लेकिन इस बार मैं आप लोगों के साथ बौद्ध धर्म की विचारधारा से शुरू करना चाहता हूँ. Because it seems to me that if we look at the teachings of Kabir in terms of practice, rather than in terms of what you might say as precepts, there's a kind of practice which is often mentioned in Kabir and in other sant teachings, which is related to meditation on the breath in the body. And just starting out here with, I don't have so many pictures this week, but this one I couldn't resist putting in. I was thinking of the way that this is a manuscript from, I believe, 1714 from Rajasthan, from a monastery, the Pushpika, the bit where it tells you where the manuscript was copied. I think says it was copied in a monastery called Narayana. I've written about it elsewhere and other people have too. And it's unusual because it's probably the first illustrated manuscript that is from, what tradition is it from? Because clearly Raidas and Kabir are in it. Clearly Gorakhnath is in it. And then surprisingly, also the Siddha Kanapa is in it, who's a 10th century Buddhist Siddha. So it seems that it reflects a kind of community of seekers who would meet together, and amongst them there were not yogis, Shaivites, sants like Raidas and Kabir, and also Buddhist siddhas like Kanhapa. So possibly it's not so surprising that people might have been talking about meditation on the breath in the body. So let's dive into this idea, and also let's keep breathing while we're doing it so we can enjoy it too as we go along. Can I make the slide move? Yes, I can. Anapanasati is mindfulness of breath, isn't it, within the Buddhist tradition? And it's the start, in many cases, of the four foundations of mindfulness. The four foundations of mindfulness, for those of you who are Buddhists, you'll be probably familiar with them. The idea of, first of all, becoming aware of the breath in the body, and then the body itself, and then of feelings in the sense of attraction, aversion, and neither attraction nor aversion, and then the different mind states which we can also become aware of. So surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, depending on your attitude, there are actually very similar practices described in Kabir's verses. And this is the one which I like very much. It's from Sumiran Gaang in the Allahabad edition of the Kabir Dohas, the Saki Granth. Kabir mala kataki, bahut jatan ka fair, mala swas uswas ka ki, jame gant na mer. So my translation is, Kabir, a rosary of wood, takes a lot of effort to turn. A rosary of in-breath and out-breath has neither, well, gant na mer. Literally, I suppose it means the knots, the actual beads of the mala, and the mer is the join, I think, between the two. So isn't it interesting to think that Kabir is pointing to the possibility of being involved in a practice of observation of in-breath and out-breath? And those of you who've listened to people teaching about Satipatthana and Anapanasati will know that the Buddha's instructions are that you should observe in-breath and out-breath, the arising of breath, the movement of the breath, and the way that the breath ends. So you can have an interesting comparison here. People are talking about turning malas, and Kabir is saying the real mala is just the observation of the breath itself. And then, of course, the question comes up, it's in Sumiran Gaang, in the anga, or in the limb of the teachings related to recollection. So let's also have a look at another doha. I've got about 8 dohas like this week, I think, which describes the observation of in-breath and out-breath as being the Sahaj path. Sumiran Marg Sahajka. The Sahaj path of recollection has been given to us by the Satguru, has been told by the Satguru. I'll do this on Hindi first of all. Sumiran Marga Sahajka Satgur Diya Batai, Svas Usvas Jo Sumirata, Ekadina Milsi Jai. The Sahaj path to recollection has been told by the Satguru. Whoever recalls the in-breath and out-breath in a single day will attain meeting. I must admit that Milsi sounds like a Rajasthani future for the word Milna to me, will come to meet. And that's probably what it is, I think. But isn't it interesting as well, because कभी-कभी ऐसा होता है कि लोग कहते हैं कि जब सुमिरन की बात आ जाता है तो लोग हमेशा इस मतलब में यही लेते हैं कि ये ईश्वर का सुमिरन. But in this verse, it seems to be saying something else. It's saying whoever is recollecting, who is conscious of in-breath and out-breath, will attain some sort of union, some sort of meeting. And that seems to be much closer to the Buddhist understanding of the practice of mindfulness of breath, in which we are attempting to find, in a sense, union with being in the present moment. However, like all good poetry, like all good verse, it can be read in 2 ways after all. It can also be read as meaning that you will attain recollection of the divine. And maybe in a sense, there are 2 different ways of looking at the same thing. But here, it's svas usvas jo sumirata. Whoever recalls the in-breath and the out-breath. That's how I'm translating it. And I'd like you to think about it in that kind of context too. Let's have a look at another interesting doha, or saki. After we don't really know necessarily whether Kabir calls all his things saki all the time, because it's a little, sometimes he seems to use the word saki, and it's definitely the word used from early on to describe the dohas when he uses them. Mala svasu svaski, fere koi nijadas, chorase bharame nahi, kate karam ki paas. So, it's interesting, isn't it, that, well, I feel it's interesting, that in Buddhist practice, anapatisati, as a part of vipassana, leads to freeing from involuntarily responding to rag, moh, and dvesh. Because as you're sitting, if you're sitting, you will find that your mind is sometimes attracted to things. Your attention goes outside the body. And sometimes you'll find that your attention retreats from things because you feel there's something disruptive outside. And sometimes your mind just kind of drifts off, as it does do. But one of the nice things you can do in Anapanasati is to then come back to the breath. The breath will lead you back, and then you can observe the way that there's a sort of involuntary process which takes place often in the mind body, which is that your mind is, your consciousness is drawn by attractive things, a nice sound, or is you feel repulsion against something unpleasant. I remember sitting with a meditation teacher and saying, oh, it's very disruptive at the moment because we're sitting in the monastery and meditating, and I'm hearing all of these terrible building noises going on next door. And he said, but they're just noises, aren't they? It's your fabrication based upon the fact that you hear the noise and then you don't like the noise that makes you then go off. You're getting yourself wander into the noise. Whereas just come back to the breath and see what's happening. So in a sense, in Buddhist practice, you can say that the practice of Anapanasati is related to freeing from karma, from this kind of continually being driven by attraction, aversion, and delusion. Look at what happens in Kabir's verse. Mala svasu svasaki, fere koi nijadas. In breath and out breath rosary, whoever turns it is my servant, Kabir's servant, or one who is like Kabir as a servant, or possibly the self, but they'll come back to that. Chorasi bharame nahi, kate karam ki paas. So here again, I think it echoes the Buddhist teaching too as well, because it cuts the noose or bonds of karma. And so you won't wander again in the 84,000 births. Bharame, as in Brahman karma. So I think too, in Buddhist practice, the Anapanasati allows us to cut that connection between the involuntary way in which karma causes us to follow Rag, Mohan, Dvesh. And this is a very parallel statement in Kabir, and I think quite a beautiful practice. The idea that we follow the breath, and this will lead to us being freed from karma. Not necessarily in the sense of, completely obtain the liberation right now, this instant. That might be too much to go for. But in the moment that you're doing it, you're freed from karma. Not always driven by karma to follow Rag, Moh, and Dvesh. There's another one of these. There's so many of these in Sumir and Gaang. So many useful saki places Sumiran as part of mindfulness practice. And let's have a look at this in relation to the characteristics. Is there some connection that we can explore together? Swas safal so janiye, jo Sumiran mein jaye. Or swas yon hi gaye, kari kari bahut upay. Know that breath to be fruitful, which is spent in recollection. Other breaths just pass by, whatever efforts you make. So I'm relying, hopefully, on the fact that as I'm speaking with you, and many of you are Buddhists, that you might have tried this sort of practice yourself. And you notice that, when you have mindfulness, then you experience the breath moving in the body. It's arising, it's moving, it's subsiding. And that is the mindfulness as mentioned in the first line. But the breaths which happen while you're kind of caught up in mo, in my case, or sleepiness, or slumber, or fantasy, or thinking about what you did yesterday, or what you want to do tomorrow, they don't do much anything. They just pass by, whatever efforts you make. And maybe some of these verses as well, there is always a problem that sometimes he might be sort of speaking, but we don't know who he's speaking to, Kabir. Maybe he's speaking to a yogi or somebody like this at point, a not Shaiva yogi, who might be doing other sorts of practices. So Kabir may be saying that you might be doing other practices like trying to close the doors of the mind, to not go in and out of the outdoors the senses. But if you do that, but you don't come back to the breath, that won't do you any good. It's not always possible to tell exactly what's going on in these verses, but it's certainly very interesting to find that there is this relationship between breath and practice clearly present in Kabir. Oh, got another one here too. This verse, interestingly enough, is normally seen as a chetavani, I think, when people look at it, simply a warning. You need to practice now while you're alive, which is a Buddhist teaching as well. However, it also points possibly to the insight into mindfulness of breath in relation to whether your body is impermanent or not. Kaha barosa dheka, binasijai chinamahi, svasa svasa sumiran karo, or jatan kachu nahi. How can you trust the body? It may be destroyed any instant. This is a very unfortunately true statement, of course. Svasa svasa sumiran karo, spend every breath in recollection, or jatan kachu nahi. There is no need for any other effort. This is also interesting, I think, because it's suggesting that breath mindfulness is an important practice for Kabir. And it's an important practice because as long as we breathe, we can do it. And it's a kind of, a couple of people we were just talking about, Kabir is an egalitarian teacher. I must say, diverge from my script and just tell you a brief story. I was, when I first came to India, I met obviously many different people from different traditions. And it's good to listen to all people from all traditions. And I was sitting one day with some sadhu on in Hampi, in a temple on the rocks above the market area. And we were sitting and he was saying, now it's a great thing to do. We could sit here and meditate and we can chant. We can do a particular japa. And I must admit that what I thought at that moment was, this japa that you're telling me is very culturally contextual, because it's in Hindi or it's in Sanskrit, or it might have been in Telugu. I can't actually remember what he wanted me to japa. But what I was thinking at the time was, why don't we just watch the breath? Because the breath is universal and accessible to all people. All living beings can watch their breath. It's like automatically we're, all of us as humans, given equal access to the breath. We don't need any specialized knowledge. We don't need any guru diksha to allow us to breathe, because we just breathe. It's what we do as beings. Slide story, but that's why I also think the breath is a wonderful thing to contemplate, because we all do it. And now I'm going to shift from those dohas, which are kind of clear, and give you an example of a very famous Kabir verse, which also, of course, does deal with this egalitarian aspect of of Kabir, but also is famous for including breath in it at the end of it, or in one version of it, which is quite a common version. And that is, of course, Moko kahan dhunde bando bante, main to tere paas mein. Na main chagari, na main phera, na main churi ganas mein. Na khala mein, nahi pooch mein, na hadi namas mein. Na main deval, na main masjid, na kaabe kailasa mein. Na to kone kriya karma mein, yahi nahi yoga biraga mein. Koji hoi to durat miliho, palabhar ki talasa mein. And the next line's a bit odd and nobody quite knows what to make of it. Many people just remove it. Main to rahu sheher ke bahar, meri puri mavasa mein. Kahe Kabir suno bhai sadhu, sab swason ki swas mein. So where are you searching for me, O servant? Or, O servant, where are you searching for me? I am right here. Main to tere paas hai. I'm not in goat or sheep, knife or axe, nor skin or tail, nor flesh or bone. Obviously, this is normally taken to mean he's saying that animal sacrifice is a pointless thing to do. It won't benefit you in any way. You can't find the divine by sacrificing. I wonder as well, though, if it's also about, like in a Buddhist practice where you look at the body and you think, oh, the body is made up of flesh and bone, skin and tail, although we don't have tails, I must admit. It's interesting to think of that. It's related to bodies, this practice. But then the next part is a clear criticism, isn't it, of looking for the divine within places which are sacred sites. I'm not in a temple or a mosque, nor in Kabir or Kailash. So it's sort of nicely balanced, isn't it, with Hindu and Muslim groups nowadays. I'm not in Kriya Karma rituals. So that's an interesting objection, isn't it, to the idea of Kriya Karma as a particular issue. Nor yoga, nor renunciation. I think when people say under Vishwas, superstition and blind faith, they're often particularly worried about people placing faith in Kriya Karma, the idea that through certain rituals being performed correctly, you can free yourself from the kind of negative effects of some things that you might have done. So there's a sort of aspects of the social criticism of Kabir coming up here, and there'll be more of that next week when I want to look at it more in detail. But let's have a look at this bit. But if you search, you will find a way in the you'll find straight away in the instant you speak. Let's drop the next line for a moment. Kabir says, listen, brother Sards, sab swason ki swas mein. And again, maaf kijiye. I'd like to say that you can read that line in two different ways. You can read it as you can read it or listen to it as meaning something like the divine can be found in the breath in all breaths. But you can also read it as meaning, listen, brother Sards, to the breath in all breaths. So if we take it on its literal meaning, it simply does mean that. The important thing to do is not to search for me in any of these other places, or not to search for the divine in any of these other places, but just in the breath itself. I've also sometimes thought of it as meaning something like that the divine resides as the breath in all breaths, which is also a lovely way of thinking of it too. This mysterious line, by the way, I'm going to now show you three, I think it is, or at least two or three other versions of this verse, because often the meaning of a Kabir Sabda is not entirely clear, or any early verses. But often there are different versions which were preserved in different traditions. And each of them will have something difficult to follow in it. But sometimes through looking at several versions, you can get an impression of how people were perhaps not sure what the verse originally meant, but they were trying to explain it or interpret it in a way that made sense to them. So the first part of this line, which is Pankti Che, "Main to raho seher ke bahar." Well, it seems to mean I live outside the city, which is reasonable, because after all, somebody like Kabir might not have been allowed to live in the city any more than Raidas would have been allowed to live in the city. As a Muslim weaver, as a Kori weaver, people would probably have been told to live outside the city. So maybe it's a flat statement like that. And then the second half of the line is particularly obscure. Mary Puri Mavasame. So Mavas crops up in quite a few Kabir verses as a word meaning something like a castle or a fortress or a refuge. And Puri is also a place which is much associated with Kabir, because Puri is a place that Kabir appears in many stories in Kabir tales. And also there is a famous temple of Kabir in Puri, connected with the Dharamdasi tradition, that Kabir also lived in Puri, just near the Jagannath temple. I don't know what it's like nowadays. I visited it many years ago and it was a kind of tumble down temple, but it might be now splendid and made up. I'd love to hear what it's actually like nowadays, but it was very nice when I went there. So it's possibly just some reason this has appeared in the middle of this line here. Does it relate to breath? Some people have read this and said that the idea is that Kabir is saying he doesn't live in the hustle and bustle of the Shahar, the city. But this is what Hazari Prasad Dwivedi interprets this line as meaning. And he somehow interprets the second part of it as meaning that whoever takes refuge in Kabir will be Kabir's servant. Maybe it's possible, I'm not sure. Let's have a look at a second version of this Shabda. So this time I can't give you a nice typed out version, but you can see what it actually looks like. So this is a Dharamdasi version, as recorded by Yugalananda Bihari. And it's largely the same, which is also a good point. It shows you that a lot of this verse was quite stable. But the bits which are unclear are the same bits which are unclear in the version which we just looked at. Moko kahan dhunde bande, mento tere paas mein. Name bakari, name chikuva, name churi garas mein. Slightly different words, but it means the same. Naho me khala punch mein, na hadi namas mein. So this now we've got skin, tail, bone, flesh. Name milo, joga tapkinha. You know, more Awadhi grammar there. And nor can I be found through yoga, through tapa, through asceticism. Na viraga sannyasame. That was yoga viraga in the last version. And here it's na viraga or sannyas. That's sort of last stage of life in the Varnashrama system. Koji hoi, so turat milave. If you search in an instant, you will be made to become united. Palbar ke talasame, in only an instant of searching. Na deval me, and then the line orders switch as happens in singing. Na deval me, na masjid me, na kashi kailash me. So we've got Kailash now for the Shaivites. I'd like to just briefly tell you a theory I have, which is that many people, when they're singing or speaking, can get a sense of what the audience might be responding to. And if there are people in the audience who I know, for instance, might be from Awadh, then I might want to mention Awadh, because I was thinking, well, that'll get their attention. So this is some singer of a Kabir tradition doing something similar, I suspect. But what it means is that the audience for this verse would have liked this next part of the line. Na kashi kailas mein, name Awadh avad dwaraka. Nor yet have I ever come to Awadh, to Ayodhya in other words, nor to Dwaraka. So those two seem to be, to me, clear references to rejection of Avatara theory, because Awadh as the place associated with Ram and Dwaraka as one of the places associated with Krishna most strongly, might be understood by that. But also it might be possibly because this song might have been sung in Awadh and in Dwaraka, because the Kabir Panthi Dharamdas tradition does seem to have spread out more, certainly into Gujarat, as one person who's was here this evening when I was talking to her earlier, from Gujarat. So if I mention somewhere in Gujarat, it's good. Oh, Dwarka's come up. Meto sanche asame, me basta serat me teri, Mary puri mavasame. And again, this different line is cropped up. But here we got a new phrase added to it. I am in true aspiration, in right aspiration, maybe, in right as in asha. It's interesting to think, isn't it, that in Buddhist teachings, you also come across Buddhist teachings which suggest to you that excessive, strong action isn't going to be the right way. Being too relaxed isn't going to be the right way. You've got to find the right amount of aspiration, the right amount of whatever it is. There's a famous Buddhist teaching about making sure that the lute doesn't snap by pulling the strings too sharply, and you shouldn't let the strings be too loose because no good sound comes out of it. Guess what? There's the same thing in Kabir as well. Me basta serat me teri. So I can't find anywhere that the word serat means anything other than possibly conditions. So I exist within your something. I think it might really be surati. I live within your attention. Mary Puri Mavasme. My Puri is my resident, dwelling, refuge. Kahe Kabir, Suno Bhai Sadhu, Swab Svasan ke Svasme. And notice that Yugalanand Bihari's version also ends with listen, brother Sads, in the breath, in all breaths. So that's, I think that's quite a useful thing for me to introduce to you, I hope. I'm sorry if it's confused you to have two versions, but I'm going to really confuse you with the third version. There's only one more to go. In fact, that's it. So Yugalanand Bihari's guru was called Shambhunath. And Shambhunath published something called Kabir Bhajanamala. And doesn't have a date, but as he's the guru of Yogalananda, his teachings must predate him. And in the Bhajanmala version, there's a whole series of bhajans of Kabir, and this is introduced in a very specific context. It says that Dharamdas was in Mathura and was trying to obtain a vision of Kabir. And Kabir appeared to him in a suksham form, which I take to mean a non-material form, and sang this bhajan to Dharamdas, which is also interesting then, because it means that at some point this was imagined as being not the divine speaking to Kabir, but Kabir, who is the divine, speaking to Dharamdas. Anyway, the verse is the same basically, isn't it? Look. Moko kaha dhunde bande, mento tere pas me. Na tirth me, na murat me, na ekanta nivas me. So again, we've got some criticisms of tirthas, of murat, which I think can mean murtis, and also dwelling alone. Na mandir na masjid me, na kashi kailasa me, na me japne, na me tapne. I'm not found in jap practice. I'm not found in asceticism. Name Bharat Upasme, and that's Brat, but written out in a different way, isn't it? Name Vrat Upasme. Name Kiriya Karme Reta, Nahi Yoga Sanyasame, Nahi Praname, Nahi Pindame, Na Brahmanda Akashame. And this particular copy isn't very good. I think some versions say Name Brikuti Bhava Gufame, Sab Svasan Ki Svasme, and some others say Name Brikuti Bhava Gufame. Koji Hoi Turat Milao, Ekapal Hi Talasame, Kahe Kabir Suno Bhai Sadhu, Meto Hu Visvasame. So the ending is quite different. So for Shambhudas, he's somehow knows this verse, but his contextualization of it is that there's something important about belief rather than svas usvas me. And if you look at the other parts of the verse, you can see that there's a lot of references, in a sense, to possibly a kind of more smarta, Sanskritized Kabir tradition, with so specific complaints about things like pran and bind, brahman and akas, and then what possibly is actually a criticism of the belief that it's important to be aware of the bhava gufa, the place within which you hear the anahada nud. So that's a bit of a mystery, isn't it? But it does show you that when you find these different versions of the verses, it'll help you understand something about them. And in this case, I think what it helps me to understand is that for some Kabir Panthis, awareness of breath, in-breath and out-breath was very important. But maybe by the late 19th century, for others, they had shifted their attention to visvas rather than svas, usvas. There are several other signs in Kabir Bhajan Mala of a much more Hinduized conceptual world as well. So it's supposed to be starting at 10. So I've been talking about 40 minutes. I'll just go for a little bit longer. Conclusion. That's good. Right. This is another verse which I've come across in the Kabir Shabdavali. And this one is not translated by Tagore and Evelyn Underhill. So it's, I'm not sure of how much it's sung either of these days. Tum jhai anjore bichavo, andhere me ka kari ho. Jab laga swasa deep jarate, jaise bane to bonavo. Gun ke palang, gyan ke tosak, surati takiya lagao. Jo sukh chaho, so sat mahalle, buhuri, dukh nahi pavo. Dasa Kabir, Guru Sej Sambaro, unki nari kahavo. Kahe Kabir, suno bhai sadhu, ava gavana mitavo. So this is a very nice last verse. My English translation at the moment reads like this, but I'm very happy to try and improve it as time goes on. This word anjare crops up in a number of Kabir verses, and it seems to mean light. It's like ujala, but for some reason it doesn't sound like ujala. It sounds like anjore instead. I don't know what dialect of Hindi this shift took place in. Hey, you, go and let the light shine. Bichavo, spread out. What are you doing in the dark? As long as the lamp of breath burns, make yourself stay just as you are. Well, this sounds like a nice practice. Make your bed from the gunas. Make your mattress from wisdom. Make your pillow from surati. It should probably be. The bliss you desire is in the seventh palace, where suffering cannot return again. Kabir the servant, make your guru's bed. Let yourself be called his bride. Kabir says, listen, brother Sards, end coming and going, avagavan. So my conclusion is that for Kabir, this kind of practice is related to union with the divine, possible within this life in the body. For Sahajayana Buddhists, those such as Kanhapa and Sarhapa, they also felt that through the practice of Sahaj tradition, they could realize the union of samsara and nirvana in this life, in this body. And there wasn't a way in which you had to sort of end samsara before you attained nirvana, but both were simultaneously present in every moment. So is this verse a kind of description of a practice like that, where you have to spread out the light? You have to let the lamp of breath keep burning and remain just as you are. You may have been asked to try and sit patiently while you breathe rather than changing what you're doing. And then this lovely line with this analogy of the gun ke palang, gyan ke tosak, surati takya lagao. So this is kind of like you should sit with the surati as your pillow. What is the actual bits? Going off, yes. And then your tosak, the word for a mattress, is wisdom. That's kind of like the, I don't know, I'm not quite sure. If I was sitting in a meditation hall, I might be expected to have perhaps a platform that you sat on, wooden something. And then you might have a kind of zabuton, a kind of mattress that you sit on so that your feet are going down into it. And then takia. It's interesting. It's too late at night. I've forgotten the word for the round pillow that people often sit on when they're sitting. But anyway, there it is. So, Josuk Chaho, so Satamahalle. A couple of versions I've read of this, people have said, well, why should it be the seventh palace? It's because of some sort of visualization that once you manage to focus your attention on the seventh palace within the body, I think we can all imagine that this is related to some sort of practice of meditation where the breath is stabilized and your attention is stabilized somewhere towards the top of your body. Then suffering will not return. And after all, dukkha is a very fundamental problem in our lives. the presence of dukkha is what in a sense leads us to do all the things that we do in relation to spiritual practices and social engagement. I don't know if this is strictly true, but I'd like to ask you to think about this, that in Buddhist practice, we often say that the first noble truth is that there is suffering. It exists within all things. And it seems to me that if my memory is correct, Ambedkar says there is suffering, but he doesn't tend to interpret it as being because of the oppression that we experience in life. And it's a good way of thinking of it too. And then the last bit about Kabir is made the bed in this way. And he's become in himself like the bride of the divine, a nari, unki nari ko. But this is the way, he says, to end coming and going, the cycle of samsara. So that's today's presentation. It's hopefully something to think about. The role of meditation on the breath in the teachings of Kabir. I think it's quite important. Oh, how nice that we're all been able to sit here. And oh, I can see we've got some lovely comments from Jayashri and from Rahul. You're going to the, yes, you're talking about going on a course by Goenka. Yes. Ooh. People are reborn with this. That's a very interesting idea. Yeah. I mean, I think we're all born with breath, so we all have the possibility of awareness. So there's something going on with that. And it's interesting that Goenka was teaching that back in 54. Fantastic. Oh, thank you so much, Mahesh.
Actually, I particularly like this way of you are presenting the things in a broad category of the Buddhist meditation. As as you are into the Buddhist practices, we know that there are various ways by which people practice. Sometimes they just sit, and sometimes they just cultivate the awareness of a body, as you said, kaya, vedana, chitta, and dhamma. And I find it very interesting that this breathing is used as a base to cultivate more refined stages of mind, because it doesn't stop just with the mindfulness of breathing.
No.
And I found it very interesting when you talked about, how the relationship between the mala of the breath and mala made up of the cart. And this is a very beautiful, as we know, very beautiful Kabir's rendition by this famous Sufi, singer from Pakistan. He says, "Saso ki mala mein simru mein pika naam."
Oh yeah.
Is it?
Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan.
Yes.
Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. Oh, फिर से बोलिए line का.
Mala mein simru mein pika naam.
Oh, so yes.
So I think these are very fine images, and then he goes taking us deeper into yourself, oneself, how the Buddhist meditation does it, starting with the mala of breathing. And then there is another beautiful rendering, a very beautiful doha of Kabir, where Kabir says that mala kahe hai kaat ki, tu kyun fere moe, man ka fer de, to sirf mila do toy. Isn't it? If you rotate, why do you the mala says, why do you rotate the rosary? Why do you rotate me? If you rotate your mind, that's it.
So it is the same teaching again. It's the mind that needs the rotating, and the breath is the natural rotation.
Yeah. And in Buddhism, as we say, that we don't have to flow with the flow. We have to flow against the flow.
Ah, yes.
So, we don't have to follow the normal flow of the breathing, or, the normal flow of what is flow of being. Pratisotagami, there is a beautiful word that, and there is a simile of a begging bowl which the Buddha threw in the river, and he said that it will flow against the stream. So it's like flowing against. It's like going against, right?
Kabir mein ye meena marg hai.
Yes.
The Meena Marga of Kabir is to flow against the stream. The fish swims upstream.
Very
Or
beautiful.
Pakshika Marg is the path that has no path because it's into the space.
Yes. So I
That's
like it
true.
very, very much. And then I found these 4 levels of Rama and Ramati and Mamati, in a sense of Ram, like that, this in the breathing, using this Shabda to cultivate the mindfulness of breathing, as it is done in some of the Thai traditions. Bud and Do, incoming, healing, they lengthen the Bud, and when they exhale, they say Do. So I think this the Ra and Ma, and at the same time, I think Soham, Peterji, Soham, so and then Ham.
It's also definitely possible that this is an allusion to the 2 parts of breath, isn't it? Yes.
Right.
The Ravidas group that we were with earlier today, some of us, Nirdosh as well, they would have loved it if we would have talked more about Soham, I'm sure, as well.
Yeah. And I think what I read somewhere, I have to find the reference that, Soham, and if you reverse Hanso, Hans. So where do we dwell in every moment, in the, as Buddha says, that you come back to what is happening now around you, what is happening in your body, what is happening in your feelings, what is happening in mind, isn't it? Because we cannot perceive the mind which is gone or which is going to arrive, only here and now. So I think whenever Kabirji is talking about this moment, actually talking about, this very moment.
Cutting the bonds of karma in this very moment.
In this very moment.
We do not need to talk about whether it means, well, we do need to talk about it, but it doesn't imply necessarily that we're talking about many lives. You also find in Thai tradition that sometimes people say the paticca samutpada, the cycle by which phenomena arise within us, can be interpreted to mean always related to rebirth. But there are other Buddhist teachers who said it just means observing what's happening now at this instant in your body, that you don't want to go through the whole of Pratitya Samuppada and let it just endlessly repeat. That's another one where you want to swim against the current and become aware that you don't need to experience one after the other.
Yes. So, sir, I was thinking about, this word Vishwas. And, the most of the times, like nowadays, I'm emphasizing that in our particular social milieu, we try to become very much rationalist, try to approach everything through the analysis is good, but there's no problem. We should do that. But I think there is a scope also for devotional practices in Buddhism, in the sense of drawn to the very mind of the Buddha. And one of the interpretations of the word Bodhisattva is somebody who is intent on becoming the Buddha. So, the intent, as you said, ask, the word here is ask. And
the intent, yes.
Yes, ask. And another is asakta. So Bodhisattva, the people are saying that it's not just essence of Buddha, but it's also being intent to attain to the Buddhahood. And I am now beginning to think, I know I'm not a scholar, but I think that some of these devotional practices, began with very early on in Buddhism towards the Buddha, particularly the poems of Matrucheta, and the way people responded to that in terms of the devotion that he brought out towards the Buddha, and calling him the Punya Kshetra, or heap of good, and the bathing bath of emotion. So if we come in contact, it tries to, it purifies your being. So I think a lot of these ideas, because I think very few scholars like you are there who have really examined this, because whenever we think about Buddhism or Indian history, anything content related to India, we think in terms of through the Brahminical lenses. So, for example, if you look at the Pali text, the kind of geography that the Pali text will teach one of the ancient India, no scripture will teach like that. And people like Bhante Dhammika, he has talked about the flora and fauna, mentioned in the Pali text. So what Baba Ambedkar says, that there is a need to study the Indian history from the Buddhist Pali lens. So we can extend it to the Buddhist hybrid Sanskrit and so on and so forth. So I think Sadhguru Kabir, as you have said today in terms of the Kanopa, and I said that, I really got goosebumps when you talk about Kanopa being mentioned. And, Kanopa is such a prominent figure in the Doha Kosh and, other sort of Doha Charya Geet and all. So, and I think I found it very fascinating that, we have a long way, a lot of people have to put their efforts to really look at Kabir and Raidas ji from this mighty tradition that is almost, it's said, gone. But I think that the Buddhism never died out from this country. I think it never died out.
Yes, I will.
Just the last point, because I don't want to take your precious time. Just the last point that I would like to mention here is, do we find the meditation on Anatma? And I think this is what, I am not in Khala, or I am not in Puch, I am not in body. Isn't it? I am outside. So what is outside? And I think this is very interesting, that where is the essence? Where is the Sahib? So I think this is a very, very important question, interesting question that I thought we should raise. And another is, in Buddhism, if we have to free ourselves, the first thing that we have to do is to do away with the ritualistic tendencies, satkaya ditti. That some meditation is going to purify me, some ritualistic action is going to, end my suffering. So I found that this first fetter, Kabir deals with it. He says that, the essence cannot be found in the rituals, not even in meditation, not in the sacred place. So where do we find it? So I think what you taught today is a very interesting, Peter sir, because the Saso ki Saas mein, I think, breathing, he's talking about a very deep level of awareness of the breathing, very subtle level of awareness of breathing. Not talking about the coarse breathing. Just like when the Buddha talked about kayanu kaya pasati, means observing the body within body.
Yes.
Vedana within Vedana. And within mind within mind, Dhamma within Dhamma. I think
yes.
It is very deep. I think what you put today to us is very deep, Peter sir. So thank you so much for this very precious teachings from you. And I think we can open up for a question before we request Jayashri ji to these beautiful duas, some of the Satvik. So thank you, Peter ji.
Thank you. Thank you for listening, all of you. And I'm hearing different perspectives. It's nice to hear different teachings. I heard that told me today as well by Joseph Goldstein was giving a talk yesterday, and a Buddhist teacher from the West, and he was talking about how it's good to listen to many voices. And then today I also listened to a recording of Patrick Olivelle and Guhaji talking about their book, a book on Ashoka, which has just been published, and saying that one of the things is that a liberal education means listening to many voices and not seeking to exclude voices, but listening to the essence of the voices. The breath in breath and the role of faith in that. In Buddhism, we often talk about it as saddha, like the word shraddha.
Yes.
So Buddhism holds a lot of practice. After all, we should have faith in ourselves, if nobody else to begin with. And we should have faith in the Buddha Dhamma.
Yes.
So there is a great place for faith within Buddhist understandings as well. So I think in the context of the way that Shambhunathji was imagining that verse should be understood as being Dharamdas seeking the divine, and imagining, visualizing Kabir as speaking to him, maybe he needed in that place more faith, more shraddha, to be able to say, keep on searching, because you will find me. If you just stop looking for me in all these other places.
Yes.
Well, not necessarily me, you will just find.
Very beautiful.
So
please,
Jayashri.
I have two questions, sir. So what you are saying about this last word, Vishwas, does it mean that, does Kabir mean that I mean, believe in oneself. And
What?
my
Hmm?
and my second question is, I really want to know that how much influence was there in Kabir's era about Buddhism? I mean, in
Hmm?
that era, was there Buddhism? I mean, how
On
much
Kabir era.
influence was there?
Ah,
Yeah,
ah, ah,
Buddhist
ah.
influence. I mean,
Okay, so I think the Vishwas appearing as the last word there in that verse in one version of it, and then people have taken that version and reprinted it many times as well. We can't say exactly what it means, but because it's there. I am search in faith. It would be I am there, मैं तो हूँ विश्वास में. I am in faith. So if we take it as literally that, it could be faith within ourselves, or it could be faith in something else. But many Kabir Panthis have told me that the only things you can really find are within yourself. There's no Atma outside of the self, according to many Kabir sants. I remember Vivek Das telling me that, the current leader of Kabir Chora Panth. So I would imagining that Vishwas could be understood in that way, that you need to have faith in order to find. But I think it's also possible it could be interpreted in a kind of what I would describe as a deistic way, that you imagine the divine as somehow embodied in some way, and you can find them through faith in that. There is a very nice Buddhist teaching, which I'm failing to remember the name of the correct text of it. It was one of the early Buddhist texts, the section on the eights, it's called at one point. And there's a teaching about an elderly monk who is asked, does he feel sad because he's no longer physically able to get to see the Buddha because he's too old to go? And he says, no, because I don't have to actually go to the Buddha to see him. I can see him within my mind. So it's an early instance of somebody having the faith within themselves to visualize the Buddha, that Buddha Anupasana, which occurs in Buddhist teachings as well. Possibly the first reference to somebody visualizing the Buddha. And then your second question is a really good question. How can we know about how much Buddhism there was in India at the time of the sons?
yeah.
Well, possibly more than we think is the answer. So the tradition of wandering siddhas and nats certainly seems to suggest that people were traveling from India to Tibet, and Tibetans, people who were dwelling in Tibet, would come down into India as well. And there is a very famous account of a man called Dharma Swamin was his given name, or name he took, a Tibetan who came down into the plains of India about 1200 and describes traveling through Magad and finding it disrupted by the arrival of the armies from the Middle East. But still, there are Buddhists practicing pilgrimage there. And in Bodh Gaya, there are inscriptions on some of the rocks recording visits by people coming from Buddhist countries to Bodh Gaya during the period when it was very difficult to get there. And there is an account of the life of the guru of the Tibetan teacher Taranat, who was called Buddha Guptanath, which I'm not sure if it's published fully yet, but it was a thesis written by somebody in Melbourne. And the account that he wrote of his life around 1600, so just about the time of Kabir, describes he as a Buddhist from Kanchipuram, which was still a Buddhist center at that point in South India, going on pilgrimage and coming through Bodh Gaya, where he stopped and spent some time amidst the ruins of the temple. But it was still a place where Shaivite Nats, Buddhist siddhas, and others met and practiced. So I think there was this kind of mobile presence of Buddhism in northern India at that time. But what is clear is that after the lands of all the monasteries were redistributed from the monasteries to the new local rulers, then the monasteries all fell into disrepair because they all relied upon the income from the lands which they'd been granted in royal sanads. So after the end of the Pala dynasty in the north, I think Buddhism as an institutional religion found it difficult to continue. But it doesn't mean that there weren't Buddhists there. So we also need to think about the question of who is a Buddhist? And really looking at Kabir makes me wonder quite a lot about it, because if you practice awareness of the breath, if you're looking at the ending of suffering, if you're looking at the nature of the arising of phenomena and their passing away, aren't you doing a lot of the things that Buddhists do in your life and your spiritual practice? So I don't want to say that Kabir is a Buddhist, but I want to say that there's the practice has these enormous commonalities in it. Not a best answer, Jayashree, but it's somewhere to begin. And it also means that there is more opportunities for search for things like that picture of Kanhapa from 1715 or 1714 from Rajasthan, which like we need to put all these bits together to try and see what we can find. And sometimes we just have forgotten to look at the things which are there in front of us. Not us necessarily at the moment, but scholars.
Thank you,
Thank you.
sir.
That was a great question. And I must remember the name of the Buddhist sutta that includes the reference to visualizing the Buddha. And when I do, I'll put it down.
Vakkali, his name is Vakkali.
Vakkali, of course. Yes, okay. And what text is that in? It's Sutta Nipata.
Yeah, Sutta Nipata, very old one. Very
Sutta Nipata, said to be a very early part of the suttas, mentioned by Ashoka in one of his inscriptions as the section of 8, something that should be learnt by everybody. So very beautiful. Do we have time for another question, or should we have some? I see there's another thing in chat. Is that a question, or?
Tara is asking one question.
Thank you, Tara. Dara. Music
Yes,
is also
sir.
Please
Sir,
ask your question.
No, you were saying jap and comparing with breath. So I was saying jap and music is also kind of meditation. So
Indeed.
when some music plays repeatedly, it sends mind into a meditative state. So in some Buddhist tradition, like Zen, there is a importance of sound. So same happens with prayer, or its rhythm and its sound. If it happens to mind, can be meditation. So same happens with any task we are doing. If we are fully immersed into it, so we forget about time passing. So we are in a meditative state.
That's a beautiful way of thinking of it as well, isn't it? That music is something as well, which, and particularly the sort of japa, and then within the Kabir tradition, there's also mention of ajapa, the japa which is not japa. And interestingly enough, this can be, in a sense, we mentioned Soham, we've mentioned Ram, and this Hamsa, which is the other way of saying Soham. So there are a number of musical, sound-based practices, which are clearly also part of the traditions in this way. And also, I mean, we say Buddhism, but then you think about it, we don't spend that much time in Theravada visualizing. But in Mahayana, they spent a lot of effort visualizing. Just like in some Kabir Panthi traditions, like Dharamdasi tradition, there's a lot of emphasis on visualization practice. Whereas in other traditions, people tend to just say, well, let's just try to be with the body. So we should expect the Kabir tradition to also have these kind of variations. And I agree, music is very important. If you think of Sufi music as well, we mentioned Ustad Ali Khan just before, but also within Sufi music, there's often a great deal of repetition, the kind of Turkish tradition, and then it's sort of movement as well, going round and round. So I think, yes, Rumi as well. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So music is certainly a part of it. And I'm thinking that we can also say that this description in Kabir of ajap does seem to suggest that initially people would also be chanting in a way that was actually some sort of repetition. But then the jap becomes ajap, the jap which is of the unstruck sound. And the unstruck sound, the sabda, is heard within the body and therefore within the breath as well. So there's some kind of a way in which these are sometimes people say these things are sane as well. They are things which indicate things are getting to a certain place. There's a lot of reference in practice to the idea that there might be signs that show that you're on the right path. And I think the musical repetition, often I believe in Kabir practice, ends up in a repetition which happens by itself involuntarily. And one of the main places that will happen is Dhara, just sitting and being with the breath.
Yes.
So before I request Jayashree ji, just to bring one reference to our discussion today, we talked about japa, and there is a small puja part book written by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, a small puja part, and at the end of it, he goes on through this Pali text, Namo Tassa, all the way to Ratan Sutta, and at the end of it, he put a japa. So what is the japa he puts? He puts Om Mani Padme Hum as a japa.
Oh yeah, why not? Yes.
So very interesting. I found it very interesting. The highest embodiment of compassion in terms of Avalokiteshvara, and he talks about you can if the Buddhist have to make any japa, you can make japa in terms of Om Mani Padme Hum. So I just to put a small reference there, and you are this very fascinating japa, and Kabir will never let you relax in the words. He will always come striking at any sanskara of the words. So if we get caught up in japa, he will say ajapa. If we get caught up in the breathing, he will say, I cannot be found there. So I think he's a very meticulous, he's a crazy master.
Yes. Yes, yes. So we mustn't rest in. So one of the, sorry to go on, but the interesting thing that Joseph Goldstein was saying in the teaching the other day as well was that it's very important to, I think it was Joseph, it's very important to have a strong sense of identity, as we must have, because we have to exist in the world. But it's very important as well to be aware of the fact that during practice, you can let that go. There's a great freedom in not being related to I and the external world, the thinker and the thought. So you must allow yourselves the freedom to step back from the ahankara, as you would say in Hindi, the idea of the thinker and the thought, because this state which is described in Kabir and in Buddhism is beyond the thinker and the thought.
Yes. So just to pay homage to our great master Sadhguru, there is this great tradition of the crazy monks, masters in Bhutan and Nepal and Tibet, and Milarepa, Marpa, Naropa, Tilopa, all this, the lineage of the crazy monks, and one of the very most popular Buddhist sects in the Tibetan, Nepal tradition and all. And Kunle, he's a Nepalese, he's a Buddhist saint. He's crazy, just like our Kabir, Guru Kabir. If somebody can find a way to communicate Kabir in this mode of being, not letting you rest, even on your cushion, always prodding you to go deeper, leaving you, trashing all your ideas. I think that way also Kabir ji can be looked, Sadhguru can be looked that way also. So just to just something inspired me to talk. So Jayashree ji, are you ready with your singing?
Yes, sir. Yes, Mangesh sir. I just want to add, and I even want to ask you both that I guess that even simple clapping also, is a kind of rhythm to get that oneness, and because and I think Qawwali, that genre has come out of it, just clapping, by clapping the hands. I think that rhythm plays a big role in getting into trance.
Yes.
If you can,
yeah, very good. If you can listen to the clapping sound of one hand.
I know clapping would be fine as well. I agree too. Yes, rhythm is good. We are talking with music. Dara has mentioned music too.
Yeah.
So we don't need to only have one Glenn clapping for the moment. We can have the normal production of sound techniques. And thank you very much, Dara, for mentioning music. And Jayashree, I look forward to your rendition of the music tonight.
So today I'm going to sing these very popular lines of Kabir. Sant Kabir. That is Moko kaha dhunde re bande, main to
Baba.
tere paas. Yes.
Mm.
So, so this is actually one famous composition by, I don't remember whose composition is this, but I just added my touch into this composition. So let me see. Moko kaha ढूंढे रे बंदे, मैं तो तेरे पास में, मोको कहाँ ढूंढे रे बंदे, मैं तो तेरे पास में, ना तीरथ में ना मूरत में, ना एकांत निवास में, ना मंदिर में ना मस्जिद में, ना काशी ना कैलाश में, मुझको कहाँ ढूंढे रे बंदे, मैं तो तेरे पास में, ना मैं जप में ना मैं तप में, ना मैं व्रत उपास में, ना मैं क्रिया कर्म में रहता, नहीं योग संन्यास में, मुझको कहाँ ढूंढे रे बंदे, मैं तो तेरे पास में, नहीं प्राण में नहीं पिंड में, ना ब्रह्मा ना आकाश में, नहीं प्राण में नहीं पिंड में, ना ब्रह्मांड ना आकाश में, हाँ मैं बकोटी भवर गुफा में, सब श्वासन की श्वास में, मुझको कहाँ ढूंढे रे बंदे, मैं तो तेरे पास में, खोजी होय तुरंत मिल जाओ, खोजी होय तुरंत मिल जाओ, एक पल की तलाश में, कहे कबीरा सुनो भाई साधो, मैं तो हूँ तेरे विश्वास में, मुझको कहाँ ढूंढे रे बंदे, मैं तो तेरे पास में, मैं तो तेरे पास में, मैं तो तेरे पास में. That's it. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu. So, thank you so much, Jayashree ji. It was a good singing, very beautiful, heart-touching. So I hand it over to Peter sir for his last comment for the day today before we conclude.
Oh, my last comment for today is that it's a treasure that we all possess, which is breathing. And I hope that we'll all be able to explore that treasure for many years to come.
So thank you so much all for joining today, and we will meet next week, which will be our 5th session on Kabirji, and as exciting as it is going, and and I'm sure that a lot of people will benefit out of this sessions in the future. So thank you so much, Peterji. Thank you so much all for joining. See you next week.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Milte rahenge.
Yes.
Thank you to all of you who came tonight.
Sir, bye. Good night, sir.
Good night.